Well, that's new. I don't remember it announcing itself like that before. How official. All right, well, great. Well, thanks everybody for taking some time this evening to join us for our review. We don't need to do the call to order or Act 92, is that correct, Eric?
That's correct. We don't have a quorum of committee members.
Okay. And it looks as though we do not have any public members, aside from, of course, the awesome planning team.
We have someone joining by phone. The person at the 295 number, if they wouldn't mind identifying themselves, that would be helpful.
Is that 295-3836?
Yes.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's Ralph. That's me.
Oh, hi, Ralph. Thank you.
Incidentally, I'm having difficulty with computers today. I may only be able to do the phone.
Okay, no problem.
All right, awesome. So, so that takes us to item 3, which is welcome and meeting goal overview. So we have a shorter meeting today than our others. The intention here is really sort of, well, threefold. One, I was just going to take us on a quick tour through the draft planning document. This is very quick walkthrough. It's the same documents that were sent out last week. So I'm hoping that everybody's had a chance to see it, so therefore it won't be surprising, hence the quick walkthrough. But I thought we would take a quick tour through the documents. And then we have the opportunity to either break up into subgroups, or we could, depending on how many of us there are and what that looks like, we could also just take the opportunity for group questions and input. But the intent was to provide an opportunity for sub-teams to sort of have a little huddle to just sort of review their section and collaborate on review thoughts, or just the ability to summarize questions or put comments in the review document directly in a collaborative kind of way. So it's just an opportunity to try to do that. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about next steps, kind of where we're going from here, public review process, and the process to go in front of the select board. So that's our goal for this evening. And I'm going to go ahead and share screen to pull up the review document. So hopefully, aside from Ralph, I'm sorry that you're on your phone and they're probably not being able to see any of it. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully this comes up for everybody where you're able to see the draft plan here, the PDF file. So just kind of a quick walkthrough. The document that we've put together, of course, has an executive summary, acknowledgements page, introduction, and then we have the technical sections. And the technical sections are of course, broken up or divided, organized by the sub-team groupings. So each of the sectors that we talked about. There is one change though. As we were putting this together, we realized that, you know, it might be kind of nice to have a section in the report specific to the municipal operations, because the town has such a significant and important action or a goal that's been put out there. So then we've created a municipal operations section. That section, however, has just pulled out the strategies and actions that were already in the plan, that were in the buildings and energy group, in the transportation group. So any actions that were specific to, you know, strategies that were specific to municipal operations, we've just kind of collected those together to keep them in a tidy little format. And then we have an overall implementation section where we provide some sort of high-level next step recommendations for migrating into implementation. So, and then in addition to that, we have a climate action plan implementation matrix, which is the spreadsheet that we've been familiar with that's migrated from the Climate Action Finder into this final product. That will be a searchable live Excel spreadsheet document that the town can use tracking things moving forward. And then we've also put together a resource web page. So we'll take a hit on each of those real quick, just to kind of walk through. So that's sort of the table of contents that I just walked through. Within the executive summary, then we just provide kind of a high level kind of overview on what our challenge, what our opportunity, what our the guiding principles for the planning effort were. We also have the summary of the goal statements that have been put before us through the process that the town's gone through over the last couple of years. And then just a brief summary of the process and the carbon reduction pathway that's included in this plan relative to the community-wide emissions. The sectors, the reductions, community-wide reductions that are included in the plan, about of that total reduction, roughly 58% is coming from transportation and land use. And then roughly 40% of the total reductions included in the plan are coming from the buildings and energy sector. And then roughly 2% is in the solid waste or waste management section. Within the introduction section, we just, again, sort of expand out a little bit more on background, the background research that started off the planning process. We talk a little bit about the benefits of climate action planning from a community perspective, resilience, job creation, that sort of thing. A quick summary on the vulnerability assessment for the community and the projected potential economic impacts by the end of the century here if we do nothing, which we've reviewed previously. We've also included a high-level estimate of the cumulative potential savings of the actions and strategies in the plan. And in the back of the report, we've provided a high-level summary of how those were calculated. Basically, there's nothing magic in there. We can say that if we save a kilowatt hour of electricity, we know that we have saved the cost of 1 kilowatt hour. Actually, I'm starting to get feedback. Would you mind everybody just checking to see if you're on mute? And just mute unless you want to say something. Excellent, thank you. A little killer feedback going on there. Okay.
Hey, Ted, maybe you can, sorry, the phone just rang. Maybe you can mute the phone person.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. Yeah, I will. That's a great idea. Let me quick hunt through. Okay. All right, awesome. So I've got everybody muted, I think. Feel free to unmute and shout out anything though. Okay, so then we talk a little bit about greenhouse gas emissions, where they come from, the greenhouse gas inventory for the community, looking forward, the business as usual projections, and what they mean and how they are calculated. And then we have a summary, what we call a wedge diagram, that shows of the strategies and actions included in the plan, what our future emission reductions are modeled to be, assuming successful implementation of those strategies and actions at the community-wide level and within the municipal operations level. So within the community-wide level, and I will say that we have taken these diagrams all take 2013 as the baseline. The reason being for that is that when we did the greenhouse gas inventories, we did 2013, 2016, and 2019. And so it's logical to either take 2019 or 2013. And we just thought, well, because we have emissions histories, diagrams that are out there that start with 2013, we would just start with 2013 so that all the documents start there and tell a story moving forward. So you'll find that in our reductions, in each of the sections, we have a little donut chart very similar to this, where we show the reductions that are included in this plan. So the amount of reduction that will come about because of these actions and strategies. We also then show if there's any previous reduction, or excuse me, any reductions related to business as usual. For instance, we can anticipate continued cleaning of our electric grid if Green Mountain Power meets their stated commitments. So there is some reductions that we can anticipate moving forward. And also if there were any reductions in the last, since 2013, any changes that have taken place, either up or down. And then illustrate whatever is remaining out of those different categories. So that you'll see in each one of the sectors. This diagram shows it collectively for community-wide. So each of these colored ribbons just represents the different sectors of transportation, buildings and energy, etc. And so the actions and strategies in this plan at the community-wide scale, we're anticipating to reduce emissions by just a hair under 29%. When that's combined with the reductions that have taken place already since 2013 and the potential business as usual changes, we end up with roughly 51% of our emissions remaining to be reduced by 2030 at communities wide. Within the municipal operations, we have 17.5% reductions that are direct from this plan, 10% in business as usual reductions, and 72% that has already occurred. That's what this big cliff is, and that's entirely related to the cleaning of the electric grid, by the way, or if not entirely, very largely, 99% I'll say. But when we're all said and done with all of these actions, including there is a small amount of offsetting included, we're at 0% remaining by 2027. Then we talk a little bit about the framework, which you guys are familiar with. It's just the how we've divvied this up into sectors and illustrate each of the actions for each of the sectors. And again, we've pulled out municipal operations as its own sector for purposes of this report. But the strategies that are there, we indicate where they came from: buildings and energy, transportation, etc. Okay. So then in each of the detailed sections, then we start off with just a little bit of a high level, quick review of some of the key statistics that relate to that sector. We then have typically a couple, 2, sometimes 4 pages or so of just some background information. Why do we care about this sector? A little bit of positioning information that you'll be familiar with because it relates to the baseline assessments that were already done. Little summary in terms of some of the climate impacts or hazards or opportunities that might exist for that sector. And then a summary of the sector goals that support the town-wide overarching goals that we have. So just sort of a quick dashboard on what we're trying to accomplish within the strategies that are outlined. And then again, revisiting the strategies, we do include a little bit of equity considerations. The intent there is just to sort of remind ourselves that as we make implementation decisions, there are potential equity opportunities for us to continue to improve equity as we think about implementation. And then we have the strategies and all of the detailed actions prioritized based on the review process that we all went through together. And those are, of course, you'll be very familiar with. And then for the mitigation sections, we have that same sort of summary of how much is being reduced through this plan. Sometimes there's this little funky thing that shows a smaller wedge. what that's telling us is that we may have actually a negative or positive, an increase during the business as usual period. In this instance, that relates to projected increase thermal fuel use over the next decade. So that bumps in to our planned reductions, which we have planned reductions, and we have in this instance a business as usual that is going to eat away at some of that progress. And then changes that have occurred since 2013, and then the remaining emissions for that sector by 2030. And then this just sort of illustrates that in a graphic format, as well as providing a specific target value of the amount of community-wide emissions that remain as a numeric value. So just trying to map that out.
Can I ask a question on those?
Please.
The pie charts that show the remaining, does that mean we're not meeting our goal for the 2030 resolution? We're short of our goal?
Yes, for community-wide, yep.
So it's significant on the overall one in the introduction. We still have over 50% that we're not meeting the resolution with.
That's right. Yeah, community-wide, you're at about I think the total there that we were showing in the introduction was 51.2, I think it was. So around 51%.
Okay, thanks.
So and of course we recommend thinking of this as a living plan. And so the reason for that is that as you begin to implement, you'll find that some actions may move faster than others. Technology changes. So, you know, what is an awesome idea right now in 5 years may want to change a bit, right? And so related to that, you'll recognize that in the emissions reduction sectors, most of those actions that are really critical will have specific goals. For instance, you know, weatherize homes, achieve X number of homes a year. So actions will have embedded into them sort of targets. Those targets relate to these numbers. So what can happen is as you implement, if you find, hey, you know what, we thought we could do 200 homes a year, we're actually doing 400 homes a year, let's increase that target. And we can also then revisit where we're going to end up with our emissions, if that makes sense. So thinking of it as a living pathway, I think is very important. And then again, for these sectors that relate to emissions, we typically have some economic potential. So these are cumulative savings related to successful implementation. And then just simple sort of bulleted ideas on what you can do, an opportunity to provide some ideas to the community on things that we can do as individuals or businesses. So each section is put together that way. As I've indicated, we've created then a section for implement the operations, same kind of format. However, we do where the strategies have come from buildings and energy or transportation, we just illustrate that to relate them back. For municipal operations, our reductions, we get to 100% reduction. As I've indicated, that does include, however, a little bit of offsetting right now. We're anticipating that it's quite likely that by 2027, there is probably going to be, for instance, some vehicle and equipment pieces that may be exceedingly difficult to, say, electrify. So we do have recommendations for going to biodiesel where we can. And we also anticipate that wastewater, we will still have biogenic emissions related to the wastewater. That's actually the bulk of what's left. So it's somewhere around 200 tons by 2027. So there is a little offsetting that we're thinking the town may need to do by 2027. It'll ultimately depend on what happens with the wastewater treatment and our ability to eliminate that biogenic source. But the plan can get you to 0 by 27. The implementation section then, we have a few things I'll just highlight quickly. a little bit quicker. We have some recommendations related to, well, first of all, I'll say that we call out that implementation is for everybody. So we're just trying to put, the community on notice that clearly, the town staff and commissions can do a lot of damage in getting these things implemented. But we need support and we need engagement by all of the town departments. We need support and engagement by the select board, and we need support and engagement by businesses and community members. The only way to reduce our collective emissions is for as many of us as possible to be engaged in that process to the extent that we're capable of doing as individuals and as businesses. So we just try to put that out there as a message. We then have some recommendations related to building an internal capacity. So that is starting off with, for instance, creating clear guidance for the select board to create clear guidance that they expect the town departments to participate in the implementation, where appropriate for each department, of course, but for them to integrate this into their operations and to do regular reviews of the progress. And most importantly, out of internal support, making sure that staff are designated and properly funded for implementation, which I think probably really relates to the energy coordinator position, but that's for the town to ultimately decide what that staffing, what's most appropriate for the town. We also talk about external support, which includes establishing a citizen body for oversight of the implementation. We've thrown in here, if this makes sense to us, the Climate Advisory Committee as the main citizen body to help support implementation, to designate a town select board representative to make sure that there's reporting and interactions back and forth with select board. And to establish a coordinated communication and education campaign. As you all know, that many of the sectors do have some communication or education components. So the ability to kind of wrap all that together in a way that can be coordinated and also support, what's this year's priority for the town's implementation. And we do talk about making sure that there's funding established, certainly for the staffing that we talked about, but also you'll find that there'll be some implementation projects that you'll want to do each year. And just to review that, establish an appropriate budget each year for the specific projects you want to implement, and make sure that that's a sustainable funding source is identified. We then, related to that, we talk about the first year project implementation. These are projects that are anticipating using the Climate Action Reserve Fund that came for FY22 that came out of the process here just, I guess it was the spring or this winter. And so we've identified those detailed actions that actually relate. This was Eric and I coordinated to put this together as a part of that review process that started in December. So we anticipated that these would be actions that would ultimately be in the plan. They're tweaked ever so slightly because of course things change, but the basics are still the same. And then we've identified preliminary budgets for each of those components. And so then, as I said, in addition to those, this document and the implementation matrix, we also have created a kind of a curated database of example policies. So wherever in the climate action plan, we kind of keep a database of policies, we add to it regularly. And as we completed this, the implementation matrix, we then sort of surfed through there to look for any actions that talked about create an ordinance or create a policy. And then we compared that against our database and have pulled out where we have them, examples for each of those sorts of policies or ordinances, or as many as we could. There may be a couple that are missing. And we've also then thrown in a few examples of other policies or ordinances that are not explicitly stated, but we think support some of the other actions in there. And the intent here is just to provide the town a place to start. So If you start working on, municipal building performance guidelines, we've got a place to start for staff to look at examples. We find that planners will often like to start off, well, let's look at what's out there so we can learn from, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and decide how we want to create those policies. So we've put that together also for the team. So that is kind of a quick dime tour. And I see that we've got 15 folks. So I would like to suggest that we do go into breakout teams. Does that sound good to everybody? Eric, do you have any other preference or suggestions for how we approach a little review time?
Well, I'm not sure. And I'm interested in hearing what others have to say. I personally am interested in participating in the review of some of the sections that I wasn't a team member or a sub-team member on. For example, buildings, building and energy and the built environment, and transportation. Now, I can just share my comments, with you, but that would be my leaning is toward doing this as a group. But if it becomes cumbersome, I can understand the need for breakout groups. One thought would be to allow everyone a chance on a section by section basis, allow everyone a chance for their sort of top priority comment or feedback or question, and then cycle through again until we hit some sort of a time limit for that section and then move on. But that's just one thought from one person. I'd like to hear from others too.
And we could do, if we do that, I think what we would in order to get through all the sections, we could decide that we would just focus on certain sections, spend 15 minutes and do, let's see, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes or so for that. So out of the 8 sections, what is that? I have to do some quick math. So it's like 8 to 10 minutes a piece. So we could do that if you guys want. Have sudden death round for each.
I know I just reviewed the sections I was a part of, so I didn't review the whole document, not anticipating that we would do it that way. So I don't know how, although I like the idea, I don't know how beneficial I would be on the sections on which I did not review anything, because it would take time for me to quick look through and be able to have anything constructive to say.
I think that sounds fair. It looks like Jeannie's chiming in that she feels the same way. Well, should we go ahead? Maybe we go ahead and try the breakouts. And what I would suggest is, how about if you feel free to join any group that's not your own, because we're all in one team. How does that sound? That way, if there is a group that you definitely want to sit in on or throw out thoughts on, you can do that. And then I will cycle through all the groups, and if anybody finds themselves in a room alone, I'll be there with you.
So Ted, before we jump in, just one last thing. I still keep going back to these pie charts. Can you put some perspective on it, on how well, I mean, I did not expect that we would be doing less than 50% of what we're trying to get to, but maybe you can give some perspective to this.
Yeah, it's actually, I think we're slightly ahead of where we thought we were going to be when we started off the whole process. So if we go back to the original draft strategic goal document, that illustrated a similar picture, not being able to, I think for the community-wide, well, I can't remember. That was also based off of 2019, but it did not get us to 100%. It was a similar sort of result. And as I've said, it isn't that the actions can't get you there. but what it means is that the actions, we would just have to increase coverage. So as an example, instead of using the weatherization example, instead of hitting 200 homes a year, or what the exact number is off the top of my head, we could double it in order to increase the reductions. I mean, that's really kind of what it boils down to. Or instead of achieving, 5,000 EVs in the community, or whatever that specific number is, I'm sorry, it's not in my head, we could double it and try to get to 10,000 EVs by 2030. So the numbers can be adjusted by taking the actions and being more aggressive with them. But I do think that you have to consider, I mean, there's a point at which you want to be aggressive, but is there a point at which it may be too aggressive? And that's clearly for the community to decide what they feel right about, what this team feels right about. So.
Yeah, and there's a point about what's too aggressive, what's not aggressive, and what are people going to say? Why did we do this if we're not achieving what we'd hoped to achieve out there? And I'd want to be able to make and sell the point that absolutely it's worth doing, even if we're just hitting the 50% goal. That was my only concern.
Yeah, and well, I mean, from my perspective, I would say, I mean, absolutely, it's still worth doing it because you're hitting 50%.
I think the charts that show the BAU curve versus the plan implementation curve demonstrate that, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. You're right.
And this, again, it's a living document, and we do try to stress that because I think it's important. It's a little bit different from almost any other planning document that way, where, I mean, even town plans and comprehensive plans, they get updated regularly, but we're talking 10-year updates. This, we're talking about sort of just keeping a mindful eye on it annually, or 2 years at the longest. I think annually is appropriate for Hartford with your goals. And just watching carefully the implementation, because if some of the actions are, for instance, we discover it's difficult to weatherize 200 homes a year, well then, trying to make that goal 400 or 500 a year is almost, it's secondary at that point. We still need to get to the 200, right? You see what I'm saying? But on the other hand, if it turns out, look, the partners really step up and there's a lot of community energy around it and 200's easy peasy, well then let's push that and start getting it more aggressive, because we're seeing that that the community is stepping into it, if that makes sense.
Thanks for helping put that in perspective.
It's a great point and a great question, and one that we should all continue to think on. If ultimately we want to adjust the numbers, we can just adjust the numbers. So I think that's appropriate for you guys to feel out.
I have one other general question too, if I may.
Please.
So the social cost of carbon, I think there's a footnote there that says it does not include health, the cost of health impacts, and also the cost of, I don't have the page right in front of me, but the cost of damage to, like, property damage and so on.
Yes, that's right. And the reason, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say those seem like they could be very large, and I wonder if even if it's not possible to come up with numbers that, with the same degree of confidence for which the other components of the cost, for the other components of the cost, then I wonder if it's possible to just suggest a sort of like a relative, like this doesn't include these two major costs, which could be up to something, right? So there's a recent, and I think the data is getting better on this. There's a recent article about a Nature Communications study for Superstorm Sandy that showed the cost of the storm overall was $70 billion, and I think that was property damages, and that using some mapping techniques, they showed that the climate change induced sea level rise resulted in 8 billion of that 70. I may be a little off on the numbers, but essentially, if you search for Nature Communications and recent article on Hurricane Sandy costs attributable to climate change, you'll find that that research or that summary. That's non-trivial. 8 out of 70 billion. So I think it feels like we, at a minimum, we need a footnote that says, by the way, dear planners, administrators, and leaders of the community, that cost is probably way low. For those of us who don't necessarily read that fine print of the footnote, we want to maybe highlight that.
I think that's a great input. The reason why we do not do that is only because we have not, what is represented is coming from an academic study that we feel pretty good about. I mean, the detail that went into that work, I feel is a good study, and it was nationwide, very defendable. And we just haven't seen any equally good studies that are applicable that relate to damage or health impacts. But I think you're right. And we can, both what you said, as well as we could also mine NOAA records, because we know how much has been, what our costs have been in the last 20 years. Well, it's easy to just say, well, this is definitely going to continue, So we can come up with something to give kind of it could be X dollars or more kind of a thing. We just don't want to mislead by the other numbers. We feel pretty good, that they're not smoke, but they're pretty good. Okay, awesome. So unless there's any other global question, I'm going to go ahead and open up the room. I'm going to shorten the time frame here to try to kind of keep us on schedule, but I will open us up. So we've got transportation, waste management, local food. Everybody can select on their own so that you're not being pushed into a room. If you want to go to a different topic, feel free. If any of you cannot, do not see how you can join a room and you need help, just let me know. I do know that some older versions of Zoom don't have that ability. So if anybody wants me to assign you, just let me know.
Hey, Ted, can you clarify what we're supposed to accomplish in the breakout groups?
Yeah, it's a great question. The intent is just to provide you guys a sub-team to just kind of collaborate. I mean, hopefully you've all looked at your sections and maybe you've got some thoughts, and just to share those thoughts with each other. If you want to create sort of a group comment, you can feel free. There's on the agenda, there's a link to the shared PDF file where you can just go ahead and add comments right on the document if you wish. But the intent is just to be able to share back and forth with each other your reactions, your thoughts, questions, or comments that you might have that you want to coordinate with each other.